everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is very important episode. We will discuss on cloud computing and virtualization. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Fred Philip, and we have Professor David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Professor Fred Philip. Professor Fred, can you hear me?
Looks like he's frozen.
Yes. In that situations, I want to give chance, Professor David Smith.
Sure, thank you, Sharif. This is a very interesting topic today as we look through them. And one of the things, let me just start with some really quick definitions to kind of get us going. Uh, Cloud computing and virtualization technology, they are related, but they're really not the same thing. Uh, Virtualization technology um, really takes physical hardware and turns them into virtual resources. So this is taking servers, storage, and networks, and it's virtualizing them so that they can be used in many different ways and even between different organizations and things. I can tell you inside companies, like in my companies, we virtualize our servers all the time, where we might take one physical server and create 5 or 6 virtual machines on it as a way to virtualize it. Cloud computing, on the other hand, is an environment that delivers virtualized resources on demand through the internet without requiring the customers to own or manage the physical infrastructure. And so most of the cloud computing uses virtualized technology, but I can use virtualized technology in my own companies and my own things without it being in cloud and it just being our data center. So cloud computing uses virtualized technology to provide the services such as infrastructure, software, and platforms. So you can see that they're uh, similar, but they're very different. And virtualization is really used there to help the companies and the cloud providers keep spending to a minimum and get the best possible use of the resources, the servers, and the storage and things. And where, once again, cloud computing is just a service that can be termed as the physical infrastructure that can be used. So you begin to look at it and you see that the other thing that's really important to realize is that cloud computing is not necessary virtualization. So I can implement things like an enterprise grade customer relationship management software or offsite storage or voice over IP telecom and others in a cloud computing environment. Those are not necessarily virtualized with others. Many of the large databases that you work with in cloud environments, for example, are too big and computer hungry to actually run in a virtualized environment. So you see that is one of the big differences in the virtualization process. And, you know, both virtualization and cloud computing, though, also operate in what is known as a one-to-many model. And both can work together, make the most of it, but you can also virtualize even a single PC to make it look like multiple PCs, and you can do that as well. Whereas cloud computing allows many different users or organizations to access a single application, a single instance, a single area in the cloud to do development and others. And it really is just two different ways to look at how do I optimize and maximize my computing resources to work together. Oh, it looks like Fred dropped. Um, so, Sharif, that's a quick introduction, and I can go deeper in some of the other areas, and let me know what you'd like me to do.
Yes. If you go for the deeper introductions, I think it will be helpful for our audience because for us, cloud computing is very important to understand and how does it work, and virtualization is also important that how we can utilize this process and get maximum benefit.
Okay. And let me just kind of jump a little bit deeper into some of the similarities and differences then. As, for example, like I said earlier, virtualization is one of the fundamental technologies that make cloud computing work. But again, virtualization is not cloud computing. So again, virtualization allows multiple servers, multiple operating systems to run on a single host that controls access to the resources on the physical server. You can also virtualize storage and others, but the idea is that on one piece of hardware, you're cutting it up into separate, isolated virtual machines, and that virtualization lets the piece of hardware run multiple servers, processes, and domains. And it's also some kind called multi-tenant through the virtualization. So what you have is you can have multiple services, multiple servers, multiple storage arrays that are located on a single machine, which this brings down hardware and operating costs as low as you can. So as an organization, if I'm doing it in my own data center, you have to purchase and maintain services, servers, sorry, fewer servers to use because you're using your hardware more efficiently and you can get more out of your hardware. It's software that lets you distribute these resources on that single physical box, that single physical computer, to create separate virtual environments. And each virtual environment or virtual machine, like I said, can run its own operating system. It can run different business applications required by it. And it can even be set up to run multiple tenants. And storage virtualization, like I said, kind of groups all the storage devices into shared virtual storage repositories that can be federated, that can be network attached, can be computer attached, and others that is available to everyone in the network, no matter where they're located. So it really helps increase the utilization of the storage, and it reduces infrastructure costs considerably because storage is actually one of the higher costs you have in your data center. And again, where cloud computing is a technology, these services, these capabilities, the applications that are accessed using the internet rather than you implement it in your own network. It allows us to uh, have other people take care of the maintenance, take care of the backup, take care of all the other things there, where we really use the internet to access it just for the services we need, the computing power we need, the storage power we use, which can be expanded and contracted very easily because the cloud provider has multiple machines there. Where if I'm doing that, my data center, if I want to expand, I most of the time have to buy new hardware, new software licenses and things, and virtual license and put it there. Um, it also, cloud computing provides us also a really agile means of storing data, and particularly in today's time where data governance, as we've discussed before, Sharif, has become so important, where you have regions of the world, countries saying, you cannot store my data outside my country. Places like China, parts of EU, and other things are great examples of that. So cloud computing services take place in a non-local space, while virtualization can occur either in a local place or the cloud providers can make use of virtualization to provide it in a cloud environment. And Sharif, I hope that made it clearer. And welcome back, Fred.
Thank you, David.
Yes, Professor Fred Philip. Yes, we are discussing on cloud
Yeah,
computing and virtualizations and what you want to share with our audience.
yeah, thank you, Sharif. A while ago, I wrote a blog and it was titled, Mr. Cloud, I Don't Like You Anymore. And I want to share with you some of the content from that blog and the reasons why I am at the moment kind of negative about cloud. Uh, I say at the moment because I may not always be negative about it, but let me dive in. I had a very nice online address book called with a company called Claxo. My online address book and all the contacts disappeared when the host company was sold and the buyer discontinued the service. My contacts up in smoke. Dropbox, which does cloud storage and data sync, uh, and TunnelBear, the VPN that I use, both decided not to support my operating system anymore, as did Google Chrome. So now I face expensive upgrades if I want to continue to use those cloud services. There's another service called Evernote that you're probably familiar with for online note taking and note storage, and it lost all my data some years back. I, um, I gave them a second chance, and now they too have stopped supporting their client app on my operating system. Their web only version is so painfully slow, it's not even worth bothering with. And Uber is convenient, but oh my, their September 2022 data breach left me really nervous about identity theft. And this is not even to mention the breaches at Dropbox, at iCloud, and at LinkedIn. Now, history shows that there are waves back and forth of where data is stored and where programs are executed, either locally on the desktop, on a remote computer, or distributed on many remote computers. So first, those of my age, listeners of my age, if there are any, uh, will remember that there were dumb terminals with all activity located on a mainframe. And then there were unconnected pre-internet PCs. And then there were smart terminals. And then there were more powerful PCs. And then there was something called client server computing. And then several more waves back and forth. And now we have cloud computing. So each wave depended on the relative rates of cost reduction and transmission bandwidth versus memory and processing. So other things factored in, namely image and video compression rates and the software vendors' ease of version control. So will cloud last? If the earlier cycles continue, um, and Moore's law continues to make local processing cheaper, the cloud may not last, and maybe it shouldn't, because now dissatisfaction with cloud computing is growing, not just because of direct costs, but because of bad cloud provider service, including outages and bad vendor decisions, of which I've given examples a moment ago. So what are the cloud's touted advantages? The advantages are supposed to be security, cross-platform capability, capacity, and cost. But let's look at each of those. Okay, as the examples that I've given show, the cloud is no more secure than the fireproof safe in my house, not to mention the safe deposit box at the bank. It's even less secure given that my house has never burned down, it's never been burgled. Now, how about cross-platform capability? I will dramatically just reply, thumb drives, okay, USB memories. Okay, how about capacity? Is that still an advantage of the cloud? Well, okay, it would be hard to mine Bitcoins solely on my aging MacBook, but I don't mine Bitcoins anyway. How about cost? Incredibly cheap and powerful laptops are on sale now, and equally cheap high capacity external hard drives, both of which fit into my fireproof safe at home. So I don't see the touted advantages of cloud computing uh, continuing validity. Okay, if I would I trust my business to SaaS, software as a service? Given what I have just told you, I highly doubt it. Um, there's a European bank called ABN AMRO. Um, during one of my moves, I neglected to give them my change of address, and they closed my account. Okay, my fault. I got in touch with them. They sent me a check for the account balance. All very well. However, I had stored some source code in what they called their digital vault. Okay? And after the account was closed, they said they'd find a way to get that code back to me now that I don't have an account to sign into. And they haven't done it. I had to find the email address of the chairman of the board of the Amro Bank. And they said, oh, sorry, we discontinued the digital vault service several years ago. Sorry you didn't get the message. All that source code is gone forever now. So, who's unhappy with the cloud? Me. I'm unhappy with the cloud. Um, yesterday in the news, there's a photo storage service called Shutterfly. And just yesterday, um, they carried news about subscribers whose photos had just gone up in smoke. And Shutterfly claims that they had contacted all account holders several months ago to say that your storage there would be no more free storage of photographs. You could only count on storage of your photos if you were a paid subscriber. Okay, there were a lot of subscribers to Shutterfly who did not get that message or who did not read the earlier news items about Shutterfly changing their policy. Um, so under pressure from the press, um, Shutterfly extended their deadlines that said it might take quite a bit of time to restore people's photos because they trashed so many subscribers' photos. So the problems still persist, and you know, I think that just keeping backups on several external hard drives distributed in some different locations around your house, your office, your grandma's house, or whatever, is going to be a more secure bet for you than relying on the cloud. Okay, now we are, well, one more thing about that. You know, the bank that I just mentioned to you, Amro Bank, are they going to next get rid of everybody's physical safety deposit boxes without giving adequate notice to people? Probably they will not do that. And that shows me that businesses still have a different view of their responsibility for their physical assets versus their responsibility for their uh, digital safekeeping responsibilities. And so this is all part of the so-called digital transformation, and I have to say that a lot of companies simply are not getting it. Okay, now let me move on to very briefly to today's other topic, which is virtualization. I value David's comments on that, but I want to come at it from a slightly different uh, direction. And virtualization has a lot to do with what some of my colleagues call the dematerialization of the economy. And by dematerialization, what they mean is that we are buying now more services than we are tangible goods, and that very complex um, tangible goods these days must also be accompanied by a service component. And I give you one example I think that I've mentioned on this show before, that our local grocery store installed several self-checkout kiosks. And the self-checkout kiosks are supposed to reduce the personnel cost of the grocery chain because then they don't have to hire so many checkout clerks. But the kiosks confuse people so much that the grocery store has to hire a human employee to stand there and help customers uh, navigate the self checkout kiosks. Okay, so there's an example where, you know, a service, what should I say here? Um, Trying to replace people with a machine uh, means that you have to have a service, human service component with that as well. Um, okay, so I think the main issue with dematerialization of the economy, or at least the one that preys on my mind the most, is that accountants, okay, I know very little about accountancy, but I'm going to venture here that accountants are very good at um, doing the numbers that relate to tangible assets. They know how to depreciate, they know how to amortize. But intangible assets, including digital assets, uh, it's it's all thrown into the same category like business goodwill. It's just one of these airy, insubstantial things that when you try to do the accounting for it, it's it's a wish and a guess. And so we have wildly, excuse me, wildly misvalued companies, as we've seen with Twitter, for example, recently, because nobody has yet figured out how to account for intangibles. And I think that I will leave those thoughts with you, and thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Very
Well,
interesting discussion.
I love Fred's stories there because I've had some similar stories with some of the services that just went away because their business model because their business model was wrong. The technology changed over time. They did not understand the power of keeping advertisers happy. All those different things came into some of those uh, equations on those shared cloud-based services. Now, what's interesting though is most of the things that Fred described are cloud-based services as opposed to pure cloud computing. So these were applications that were ran in the cloud, but they were not the native computing services and other things that cloud computing also provides. So there's both of them go kind of hand in hand, and those experiences tell you very much. Not only do you have to do due diligence when you select one, but you have to be very diligent in following up and tracking it too. And I can tell you, for example, sometimes if emails change and you no longer have access to your old email, you lose access to all that data, all those services and things too. Uh, and that is as frustrating as can be. And yes, Fred, I have lost access to code and stuff too because of simple things like that. One of our companies had the company name at .world because we thought it would be neat to have a .world domain instead of a .com. but most people didn't recognize .world, and there's services we couldn't sign up for. And so we went away from .world domain to .com, and all of a sudden the things we signed up for under .world we can no longer access because we weren't using uh, uh, that. Um, so those are challenges you have in the digital domain. And yes, I actually, for my company, we run 2 physical data centers here in Austin uh, at a service. We run them in 2 different data centers for redundancy and business continuity and stuff. But I have to manage them. I have to buy the hardware that goes in there. I have to have people do the updates. We manage the security. We pay the communication costs and all of those myriad of details. Where I also have services that we run, for example, in the Microsoft cloud, and they worry about all those. Now my cost is higher in the Microsoft cloud on a compute cycle, on a storage cycle than what I can do in my own data center. But then I have more flexibility, so we use both, and I think you see that more and more. So in companies, there is a 3 major trends that you see, and this is independent virtualization. Again, virtualization's used in both instances. So one of the trends is let me run everything in my own data center. Another one is let me run things in a cloud provider like um, Microsoft, IBM Cloud, Amazon Cloud, Rackspace Cloud, and others like that. There's many cloud providers. And the third one, though, is a hybrid. Let me run some things in my data center, let me run some things in the cloud. And this has been a pretty effective strategy for some places. Um, I'll give you an example. The company Texas Instruments is really good about using a hybrid approach where they run things in their data center, they run things in the cloud, and they primarily run most of their sales or marketing in the cloud, most of their operations in their own data center where they want the more control. And so you see that as a strategy often used in cloud computing that is taking advantage of virtualization technology, just like it's also taking advantage of the virtualization technology uh, in the cloud or local. So let's just let me just put one thing out that can maybe help us distinguish what the differences are. Virtualization is a technology. It's a technology that can be applied to hardware, to storage, and others. The cloud computing is a methodology as opposed to a technology. And you see those differences. So in the virtualization, it creates multiple environments from one physical piece of hardware again. And so what the cloud does though is it pools and it automates virtual resources versus virtual environments, virtual resources for on demand use. And you see them very much differently. Uh, you know, if I'm going to virtualize my own data center, my own hardware, it's going to probably be long term. If I'm going to use a cloud, I've been known to stand up cloud environments, and Fred, this might surprise you. I've stood up cloud environments that I've only used for less than a month. We used them for a thing, we ran the resources, we used it, and then when we didn't need the cloud environment anymore, we turned it off. Where if I had to buy a server, had to put software on it, had to put network on it, storage on it, people applied to it, it's not something I'm going to turn on and off in a month. It just doesn't make sense like that from a business standpoint. So those are some of the differences. The other thing is cost. In a in my own data center using virtualization technology, I have a high capex to bring them in and there. So if I'm in that, I have a high capex and a fairly low opex. If I'm in a private cloud, I have a high capex and a low opex. But if I'm in a public cloud, I have a very low capex but a much longer opex. So capex is capital expenditures. OpEx is operating expenditures. So expenses really. So you can see just the difference there from business standpoints where they are between just a virtualization in my own data center and virtualization in a cloud environment, which are again two different things but using some of the same technology. The other difference is in my data center, we use some different words. In my own data center, I am really scaling up because I'm buying more hardware, I'm buying more resources, I might be bringing in more people to manage it. I might have to buy more bandwidth. Might have to do other things like that. Where in a cloud environment with cloud services, instead of scaling up, you really talk about scaling out. So instead of me buying in things, you're just scaling out and using more of the virtual resources that the cloud provider are making available to you. For startups, many startups love the cloud because they don't have to buy hardware. They don't need to bring in expensive management people. They do not need to uh, handle some of the real hard things. Most, for example, in most of the cloud computing environments, the cloud security is managed by the cloud provider. You still have to do security on your own workstations, your own notebooks, your own devices, but your major computing security is handled by the cloud provider. The major certifications required from that, be it PCI or HIPAA or privacy things, are handled by the cloud provider. Where if you do it in your own data center, all that falls upon you. So you have those differences as well. Uh, and you're going to make decisions uh, based on that as you adjust your business model and where you are in your company growth. I can tell you many startups I know that started with cloud went to a hybrid environment as soon as they could to manage control, to manage intellectual property, to manage their costs in a different way because cloud environments are very expensive. I can tell you, I'm on the board of multiple startups, and a few of them started out with AWS. AWS is one of the more expensive clouds, very flexible, but very expensive. And as soon as they got enough customers and things to sustain themselves, they started moving to other environments where the cost factors went down. Uh, so you have that as well. So they are dynamic. But once again, I love seeing virtualization and cloud computing in the same sentence that you did, Dr. Shree. But again, it's very, very important for your listeners to really think and understand that virtualization is a technology that can be used in one's own data center or in a cloud computing center, where cloud computing is really the methodology of how you access the computing power, how you access storage, how you access the other services around it, and where the applications reside and where the data resides. Where in your own data center, you have full control. Sometimes in the cloud, you do not. And that's why all the new data governance laws are coming in place. I might be serving you in a cloud environment, Dr. Sharif, in Bangladesh, but your data could be stored in China. It could be stored in Europe. It could be stored in the United States or South America. And many cloud providers don't even tell you where it is, nor do they tell you where your computing power is. If you're using a cloud provider in Bangladesh, your computing power might be halfway around the world in a place that you don't agree with. So those are some of the pluses and minuses between the two streets. So I hope this has helped some. And Fred, I loved your stories.
Happy to provide them.
Yes. Professor Fred Philip, you visit Bangladesh as a keynote speaker. So, what do you think how Bangladesh can be benefited through this cloud computing and virtualization process?
I believe that David's strategy of using a cloud service for only a couple of months or for just as long as you need it is very, very sensible. Um, It brought to mind the project I'm on right now, where we're just a group is jointly editing a Word document on Google Drive, and when we're finished editing it, we'll take the document off of Google Drive and not depend on it any longer for that project until we have another editing project. That's perhaps a trivial example of what David was talking about. Um, yeah, I think that businesses in the cloud need to think, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, need to think hard about the kinds of responsibilities um, David is talking about. Um, long before email days, showing my age here, um, I had an account with a bank that did drill my deposit box, which I found out unfortunately when I visited the bank some time later. And they said, hey, we contacted you by mail, or maybe it was the early days of email, I don't recall, and wasn't able to contact you. So the rental on the box was not paid, and we drilled the box, and you don't own it anymore. And they had the contract on the desk there when we were across the table from each other. And I said, look, here is my telephone number right here on the contract. Did you try to call me? They said, no, we didn't try to call you on the telephone. And, you know, if you place that story in the context of what Shutterfly has been doing these past months, it seems that they make a cursory attempt to contact the account holders, even if they have multiple means of contact. They use only one because then they can cover themselves. They said, okay, we did what was legally required. And, you know, it shows that if you're a cloud company and you do the minimum that the law requires rather than trying to actually serve your customers, you're going to get quite a lot of bad reviews, and bad press, and it will hurt you. But that seems to be what company does. So you wanted advice for Bangladesh, Dr. Sharif, I'll tell you that if you start a company, please be responsible to your customers and not just do the minimum that's required. Um, I hear you, David, about virtualization as a technology. Virtualization's brother, which is dematerialization, is a consequence of technology. You've heard it said that this is the experience economy, okay? That younger people, especially as they live in smaller apartments, are not buying material goods. They like to buy experiences, which include vacations and local rock climbing adventures and just things that they can't put in their hand and bring home. And so these experiences may be very much more valuable to the buyer than it costs to provide them to the seller. So we have what's called consumer surplus issues, and these are hard to put into the accounting system. Right now, I'm using StreamYard for free to participate in this morning's program. Is it free to use, Sharif, or do you pay? In any case, how does StreamYard put an accounting value on all the free access that they're granting? Well, I'll tell you how they do it. They put an absurdly optimistic estimate of how many free users are eventually going to convert to paid users. And they put that on the books now to inflate the value of the company and attract further investment or perhaps sell the company. And this is just another one of the distortions that are introduced into accounting systems by the dematerialization of the economy. And okay, I think that's all of my opinions for this morning.
Thank you, Professor. Professor David Smith.
I love the term dematerialization of them because I almost feel like I'm transporting something in Star Trek as we look at some of
Yes,
this.
yes. Uh-huh.
But I actually agree with Fred in some other ways. I actually use a different term, Fred, as I look at large systems and things. And what we're doing is we're de-integrating them, we're disintegrating them. And to me, that's one of the biggest trends I'm seeing today in industry. Well, let me just give you my top three trends and we'll see how they fit. One of them is integration and interoperability. Is we're seeing a trend to try to make the data and the services interoperable between each other. Really, really hard to do. Very, very hard. I have one of our portfolio companies that I've been with for a long time, and we have spent about $35 million building an interoperable platform that's just now going to market. And it's years later because it's a really hard problem, but interoperability is one of the big challenges today. And we're seeing that. The second one is actually the disintegration of services. For example, in healthcare and customer relationships and other things, you have usually 3 to 5 big players and they try to do everything. But the world is moving so fast that they can't do everything. And so you're seeing them disintegrated where you're having the smaller, nimble companies come in and do part of it and doing it better than the big players before. And Fred, in some ways, that's what you were talking about too. So what you're seeing is the disintegration of those large monolithic players because they're not fast enough, they're not agile enough. And because we have interoperability becoming to play, it's easier for people to begin to move and 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 shop the services versus buy one company that tries to do everything so and never really excel at any of them. And, examples in healthcare are like Cerner and Epic, NextGen, Athena Healthcare, eClinicalWorks. Works. These are all big companies trying to provide services to all of healthcare, and they don't do any of them very good. And they're very slow. If you want to make changes, they're very expensive, and they can't keep up with the rapid changes like telemedicine, genetics, immune therapy, all of home health services, all that have happened very fast. And most of them have no solutions to that yet, even though telehealth started really in earnest with the start of the pandemic. The third thing, though, that trend that works with this is speed of innovation. And Dr. Shree, this is where you in Bangladesh, this is where a lot of the people in the developing world have an advantage in that you do not have as much bureaucracy, you do not have as many set rules as we have in some of the other developing nations, where you can use speed of innovation to there. And in many industries, I think speed of innovation will become the next trend after interoperability, after transformation. Uh, so, Sheree, like I said, you have a lot of advantages there because you do have the ability to be interoperable because you're controlling a smaller environment. You do not have as much legacy systems as we have. I love Fred talking about email. Uh, I did my first emails on teletype machines on paper, and it looks nothing like the emails today. I played my first computer game on paper with X's and O's representing the playing field as you typed it out. And every time you move, you got a new printout. And I still remember writing programs on card punch machines and carrying the cards across campus and hoping I didn't drop them. Uh,
Yeah, me too.
so yeah, and so computing has come a very long way, and digitalization has come a very long ways. And uh, those are some of the things that I think you do a very good job, Sharif, in your series of touching on is where are the inflection points? Where are the must know technologies? And where are the confusing ones? Like I said at the top of this program, virtualization and cloud computing often get confused, but they're very, very different. And it's important for your people to know it. So Sharif, let me just hit a couple of other things on virtualization if I can to try to make a point in there. So, for example, I can virtualize a whole bunch of things uh, and work that way. So I can virtualize desktops. I can virtualize network. I can virtualize the computing cycles, the CPU and the GPUs. I can virtualize storage. I can virtualize data. I can virtualize my operating systems and cloud. I can virtualize my clouds even. But some of them make a lot of sense. So, for example, desktop virtualization is something I might use if I'm in a developing nation more than I'm using here. So, what Fred and I both do is on our notebooks, we run probably Office or a variation of an Office program. We run our email programs locally on it. We run a spreadsheet program locally, maybe a database locally. Might run a presentation software locally on our machine. But with desktop virtualization, what I do is I connect to those services in the cloud or to those services in a virtual environment in my own data center. And so, for example, all of our Microsoft Office might be in a virtualized environment, either in the cloud or a data center. Same thing with development. Uh, I have some developers who develop on their local machine, but my preference is that we have the developers develop on virtual desktops, on virtual machines, so that all their development work stays in my data center, my instance, or in the cloud. That way, if their machine is lost or stolen, I don't lose their work. Where if they develop locally, I lose their work if their machine is lost or stolen or crashes. So that is some of the other type of virtualization environments your listeners should be aware of, Sharif. It's not just a computing environment like a Microsoft Cloud or a Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud. There's many other virtualizations that can take place and be used there. And some make sense and some do not make sense. Uh, and I can even though on my own local machine do a local virtualization. And I'll give you the example for that too. And this is again a place where developing nations come in. Street. So on one of our company, actually on all of our companies, we use developers spread out around the world. So in one of our products, we have a complex development environment that runs on Linux. It uses Linux tools. It uses an integrated development environment optimized for Linux. But some of the developers we've hired recently in Brazil, some in Costa Rica, some in Colombia, some in Portugal, uh, and some in Sweden had Windows machines. And you can't run Linux services, Unix services on a Windows machine. So what we had to do with them is help them understand how to virtualize their uh, computer, their notebook, or their desktop, so they can still run Windows, but they can also have another virtual environment that runs Linux. So when they're working on our programs, they work in their Linux virtual environment. When they want to go do something else, like balance their checkbooks or play games or whatever, they go back to their Microsoft environment. And so that is a local virtualized desktop, just like you can virtualize in a data center and virtualize in the cloud as well. So, Sharif, I hope that helps, and you can see how, I use developers all around the world in developing countries because it not only is cost effective for me and I find really good people, it also helps each of the countries that we contract these people in. So it's a win-win for all of us around. So, Sharif, I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you. Professor Fred Philip, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Um, yes, I was struck that David, you just highlighted two kinds of virtualization. So let's distinguish virtualization as in distributed services and virtualization as in simulation. So yes, I well remember simulating one computer on another computer, trying to develop applications for the IBM PC. Remember those on a Macintosh because we could set up a virtual uh, DOS machine on the Mac long, long ago. But then there's also simulation, like in SimCity, and the word virtual persists in simulations like virtual reality. Okay. So both will both types of virtualization, distributed services, and simulations of all kinds, both simulations of one computer on another, or simulations of cities and these markets and all the rest will both persist into the future. And as a closing amusing note, I remember our mentor, David's and my mentor, Dr. Kosmetsky, went around using the phrase reality simulations. And I never challenged him on it, but I always used to think, what the hell else would you simulate? It's one of those redundancies that I think we can do without. Let's just call it simulation. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I always love when I'm with Fred and others from the old IC Square University of Texas at Austin days, as they bring up one of my mentors, George Kosmetsky, and actually his wife, Rona, who actually I think was as much of a mentor as George was to many people, uh, and how he was ahead of his time, um, and often had to be translated to other people after he spoke. Uh, but Sharif, what I love with your topics again is you do ones which have impact globally as well as in your own target audiences of your developing nations. Uh, on this topic, I would have loved to have seen more public comments coming back in from folks because I can tell you in many of the countries where they speak multiple languages, virtualization helps you do that. I was having a discussion last night and with some of our developers, this particular one who lives in Costa Rica, and he was moaning the fact that some of the services we use, when it detects that he's in Costa Rica, it changes the language he interacts with automatically from English to Spanish. And he's going, I don't want Spanish, I want English on here. But there's not a way he can do it without a lot of tricks to make this company think that he's in the United States as opposed to Costa Rica. And so, our solution to him is, well, let us just set you up a virtual environment here. You can remote desktop into it and do it, and that will solve your problem. He's what? Great solution. And so we're doing that, and that's a place where virtualization uh, solves some really problems that shouldn't be problems, such as language choice and things. I mean, I know they thought they were doing a really good service, by automatically giving him a Spanish one. But his comment was, well, if you read the Spanish, it's horrible. So clearly it's an automated translation program doing it because it doesn't make sense. Uh, and those are some of the good and bad things. But again, like I said, Sharif, developing countries have an advantage in many of these instances because you control your environments. And virtualization lets you optimize your resources locally. It lets you get more out of your boxes. It lets you use storage in a more optimized and efficient way. It lets you do things like remote desktops where you might have people working multiple shifts. Instead of having to put that software on all three machines, you let each of them use it during their shift on this remote desktop and others like that, where you can share these type of services. And that's one of the reasons when you have clouds is this whole concept of shared computing, services, shared resources such as storage, and other people looking after your hardware, software, and you're not having to. So you focus more on your business tasks and your business ideas. But my really the closing remark to your people, Sharif, is I'm going to go back to the one thing I said earlier is remember virtualization is a technology that you can use on your own local notebook, your own local desktop. You can use it in the data centers of a company or a government agency or university or whatever, versus cloud computing, which is a methodology that uses virtualization, but it divides up and sells those to you as pieces that can be expanded to contracting. Well, like I said, one's a technology and one's a methodology, and there's times for it to use all the approaches, and you just have to become an astute business person and do the ones which make the most sense in your company, your organization, your government, and use them appropriately. It's real easy to jump onto one bandwagon or the other and not doing appropriate due diligence and not tracking enough, not understanding that even when you use, for example, cloud services, a great business practice, and Fred, I'm going to remind you of this one, is things that you keep in the cloud, always keep a local backup. So you learn things like that from scars on you. And it sounds like Fred and I both have some similar scars in our past that we won't repeat very often, hopefully in the future. But Sharif, this has been a great program, I think, for your folks, and one that they can take and apply what they learned today to the things they're trying to do in the future. So
When
thank
I
you.
came back from Bangladesh and Taiwan, which I was on the same trip, you can imagine that I got plenty of messages and default web pages in Bengali and in Mandarin, neither of which language I speak. So the direction I'd like to see virtualization take, I'd like to have a virtual Fred who would stand between me and some of these web-based mistakes, and so that I don't have to spend my own time fixing them. Because the cloud seems to anticipate very well some of the things I want, but also makes some pretty awful mistakes. So a
Well,
virtual Fred, I think, would fix that.
and hopefully, Fred, this generational AI that we've spoken about with Sharif on multiple of his programs, like the Chat GPT and others,
Yes,
are going to help us move that way. It comes with its own risk, it comes with its own learning curve, but that is the goal of what we think will the capabilities will be there in the future if we can control it and if the ethics and things work out on it. So hopefully we'll get that way.
yes. You know, I was. You probably also get greetings on different messaging apps from people you don't know who start to act friendly, and some of them are genuine. Some of them are probably, Nigerian scammers masquerading as attractive young women. Uh, but I think these days we are starting to get uh, social media approaches from strangers that are AIs. And the way the subsequent
We are.
conversations go, I think that I'm not speaking with a human, but just actually helping to train an AI that is scamming me, you might say.
That is very
Thank you.
true.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Fred and Professor David Smith, for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government agency, corporation, and academy. And hopefully, through this session, you can learn many interesting aspects of cloud computing and virtualization. I want to give special thanks to Professor Fred Philip to visit our beloved Bangladesh, and hopefully, Professor David Smith also visit Bangladesh soon. So I want to invite Professor Fred again in Bangladesh. Thank you, everyone, and especially your students, Professor Fred in Bangladesh. I meet with them; they want to learn more from you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Thank you. Good to see you. Bye bye.
Appreciate it. Thank y'all.